We've come full circle on Caleb Williams now, going from maybe a little overrated entering the NFL draft last year to now being completely underrated entering his second season.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, I want to dive into the ongoing debate here about Caleb Williams' floor and ceiling. This debate got really sparked last week about, what he can be in both the positive and negative direction. And it feels like we've kind of overcorrected here, where maybe initially coming out of the draft, he got some really lofty comparisons that maybe were a little bit too high, unrealistic perhaps, even for a number one overall pick at quarterback. But now we've sort of overcorrected in the opposite direction, and now I think we're aiming a little too low on what the projections can still be for Caleb Williams now for the rest of his career after one difficult rookie season. So I want to take a look at kind of what the best and worst case scenarios look like for him and how that compares to some of the other young quarterbacks in his draft class that he's going to be compared to throughout the rest of his career. Now, the impetus for all of this started actually with an article from PFF and one of their analysts, John Costco. I know John Costco personally. I used to work with him at PFF. Met him a few times. He's a good person. So I'm not here to be critical of John and his analysis here specifically, but I think it's a good conversation point, and I think it got a lot of Bears fans riled up when John sets he did sort of ceiling and floor for all of these young quarterbacks from that draft class. And what he put for Caleb Williams was a floor of draft bust, which, okay, I mean, yes, of course, I think any young quarterback can still end up being a draft bust. I don't know that there's a ton of argument that, like, yes, we know what the floor actually can look like, but I do we'll take some time in a minute to go through what that actually looks like, and not just bust, but what type of bust. There's different kinds of draft bust and different levels of failure for a number one overall pick that I want to get into in a little bit. But he put for Caleb Williams' ceiling, he listed Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers, which of course is explicitly going to piss off Bears fans, right? Like of course, like you couldn't pick, like there's two aspects of it, right? There's you think Jordan Love is going to be, you think Caleb Williams is going to be better than Jordan Love, and then also putting Caleb Williams' ceiling as the Green Bay Packers quarterback, like almost no matter who the Packers quarterback was going to be there, maybe short of Aaron Rodgers, you were going to have upset Bears fans. I'm like, what do you mean he's not going to be better than the Packers quarterback, right? Like there's sort of two layers to the disagreements there, I think, that we're hearing from Chicago Bears fans. But to go through what John wrote specifically in his article, so we're giving this an accurate read here. John said, quote, Williams entered the NFL with a tremendous amount of hype, only to disappoint as a rookie, especially when compared to the rest of the class. Williams' season was, at best, underwhelming. He flashed big play potential and incredible arm talent, but he struggled with accuracy and took on pressure and sacks far too often. His 63.5 PFF passing grade was the worst of the 5 first-round quarterbacks who saw action in 2024, as were his 54.7% accuracy rate, 23.2% uncatchable pass rate, and 26.1 pressure to sack rate. All of the issue we saw in his final season of college football showed up in his rookie campaign. Granted, top prospects who don't put it all together as rookies are still capable of turning things around. Jared Goff is one notable example, and Bryce Young appears to have turned the corner ahead of 2025, but struggling as badly as Williams did usually does not end well. Still, he has the talent and one of the best supporting casts in the NFL to turn it around in 2025. And I think if you just took that chunk of text there and separated it from the ceiling and floor comparisons there, I don't think there's too much that's off base there in the actual analysis of the player. That, like, yes, I think maybe you can blame the situation and supporting cast in Chicago a little bit stronger than what John did there, but he's right. Like, he didn't perform as well as some of the other rookie quarterbacks, and that that's not a death knell. But typically, quarterbacks who start slow don't always turn it around. But there's plenty of examples of quarterbacks that do, and I think we all reasonably expect Caleb Williams to do so. So I think there's generally a pretty good basis behind the analysis. But the ceiling of Jordan Love, I think, is the most objectionable part there. I've seen people like Danny Parkins go as far as to say that Caleb Williams is already better than Jordan Love. I mean, I think he might be this season, but not what we saw purely alone from last year. I wouldn't go that far, but I think it's an interesting conversation to jump into because of where things were with Caleb Williams in the pre-draft process, right? When we think about what his ceiling might be, a lot of times that's what scouting reports are really talking about when they go for their NFL player comps for a college player. It's kind of, we're usually talking about a ceiling in most cases. So it's interesting to see where his supposed predicted ceiling was coming into the draft versus now a year later after the rookie year, where this Jordan Love approach ceiling is now. Because I was looking back at old scouting reports for Caleb Williams. I think the most common comp I was seeing for him was Kyler Murray, like a taller Kyler Murray. But then some people were also comparing him to Aaron Rodgers. Some people even comparing him to Patrick Mahomes. And I think that's probably where things got too over the top, right? Like when we talk about kind of overcorrecting here, where maybe I think it's overrating Caleb Williams to compare him to Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes, right? It's not fair to any rookie quarterback, even a number one overall pick, to say this guy is going to be a future Hall of Famer, because then you're going to be disappointed if he's anything short of a future Hall of Famer. And it's even number one overall picks. You can't expect them to all be future Hall of Famers. You can expect them to be very good players. And I think that's where like the Kyler Murray type of comparison is a little bit more, fair from a pre-draft standpoint, as opposed to Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes there. And I'm left feeling like this rookie season didn't necessarily change at least the Kyler Murray level comp. But yes, Caleb Williams was not Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes as a rookie. Like that's totally fair, despite those quarterbacks not immediately being Hall of Famers right away. But like that's fair. He didn't have the kind of rookie season that would suggest he's going to be Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers. But like when we've seen the ups and downs of Kyler Murray's career, a quarterback who, by the way, has never thrown for 4,000 yards in a season and led the NFL in sacks taken during his rookie season. Like I don't. It's harder for me, and this is where I join in disagreeing. Like it's harder for me to see how the ceiling is not still that Kyler Murray plus caliber of player. And maybe this is also just a very favorable evaluation of Jordan Love, feeling like he's a really good option, and saying that it's a compliment to think that Jordan Love is a ceiling type player. Although I'm not there yet personally either. I still want to see more from Jordan Love, and we still need to see more from Caleb Williams. But I think the ceiling remains like at that Pro Bowl plus caliber quarterback there, where like, no, we shouldn't expect or put this Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes level comparison on Caleb Williams, because that's just not fair for any player. But I think something more in that Kyler Murray range feels a lot more appropriate, and still it feels like it was more appropriate on draft day than the Aaron Rodgers, Mahomes comps, and it feels more appropriate now than like the Jordan Love comps. So can we just sort of keep it where it is and see how things go for this 2025 season? Like if he has another bad year, that's when you change the directions of the comparison and where you start to have the BUST conversation there. But that's the other side. The other aspect of this is like there's a lot of different kinds of quarterback busts, especially when you talk about like number one overall picks. Like there's different degrees of, does someone completely fall out of the NFL entirely? Do they become a backup, or are they just a lower end starter than you thought they would? So I want to take a look at the different types of QB busts and like where Caleb might fall on that spectrum, like on the worst case scenario side of things, as opposed to the best case scenario we were just talking about, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Do you ever look at your bank account and kind of wonder, where all your money went so quickly? Sometimes managing your money doesn't feel super easy. So whether you're trying to grow your savings or plan for a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Because Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. I've got the Monarch Money app on my phone. I use it all the time because it's so convenient for me. I used to have different apps for all my different accounts, right? I had my credit union banking, my checking account app, my credit card had its own app that I would check in on, my retirement accounts, my investment accounts, and I had to sign into 4 different apps and 4 different accounts to check in on my complete financial picture. But with Monarch Money, it tracks them all in one place, all your accounts, investments, and spending, so that in addition to managing your money, you can really start building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. So if the ceiling for Caleb Williams may be still Kyler Murray type range, right? Maybe, I mean, on the low end, Jordan Love, on the high end, I guess Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes. But like, if we just leave that around Kyler Murray, the low end, we have obviously as like draft bust, right? Of course, like what's the worst realistic scenario? Yeah, he's a bust and not the quarterback the Bears need him to be. But like, what does that look like? Like that can mean a lot of different things, and we've even seen different versions of it with the last few Chicago Bears quarterbacks. And I should say, I'll give credit to PFF's John Costco, the writer of this article we've been talking about. He later clarified on Twitter that he said, he wishes he would have listed a specific actual bust quarterback as the floor for Caleb Williams. And he opted for Zach Wilson of the New York Jets as the sort of comparative bust quarterback there. And I think I get that in the sense of like Wilson struggled a bit with holding onto the ball too long, taking too many sacks, and not getting rid of it quickly enough, and like working through, I don't want to say working through progressions quickly enough, but like pulling the trigger quickly enough on those. And now, of course, he's in the backup quarterback category that I think a lot of people are still holding out hope that he can have a late career turnaround. But spent a year with the Broncos, and now I think he's with the Miami Dolphins as a backup there. And that obviously, any of these sort of bust scenarios for Caleb Williams feels like a pretty complete disaster. Like we can kind of acknowledge on the front end that any kind of bust, when you have a number 1 overall pick who's supposed to save your franchise, like you're going to be screwed, whether he's an okay bust or a horrible world-class level bust. But I think it's important that, like, based on what we've seen from him his rookie season, like obviously he's not, useless. This is not he's not going to turn out to somehow become a bad quarterback. Like this rookie season should be as bad as we'll ever see Caleb Williams. Like he's not going to get worse from what we saw this past season. And what we saw this past season was, 3,500 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Like, yeah, he took a lot of sacks and probably brought on more pressure and probably tried to do a little bit too much. But like the Caleb Williams we saw as a rookie, if he say he hypothetically somehow never got any better, he's still like right there as a starting caliber NFL quarterback, a low end starting caliber NFL quarterback. But like, I think the Caleb Williams we saw as a rookie is like kind of where Justin Fields is right now, where it's like competes to start with other teams. And not to say that they're the same quarterback, but more like the same caliber of quarterback, where it's like, he's maybe not going to be the savior of your franchise, but you still feel like there's more you can get out of him, and he can help you win some games. And you feel like if you assemble the right talent around him, you can minimize some of his weaknesses and maximize some of his strengths. And maybe he's never going to win MVP, but could you win double-digit games with the right team and coaches around him and make a playoff run? Absolutely. Like that to me feels like the floor for Caleb Williams that we started seeing during his rookie season, right? Like this is not a floor of, even Zach Wilson feels a little low for that, given how much he flamed out and looked not like an NFL quarterback. Zach Wilson had a negative touchdown to interception ratio. Zach Wilson has completed less than 60% of his passes for his career and has a much higher interception rate. There's a lot of things about Zach Wilson that I think were clearly worse than what Caleb Williams was, and it's just hard to envision those scenarios where somehow Caleb gets worse than what he was as a rookie. But like, there's like the Justin Fields level bust. There's or like a Daniel Jones type of situation. Like that to me, like he's also, I mean, you got to call Daniel Jones a draft bust just because he was the 6th overall pick. I know he got a second contract from the Giants, but like was really, really bad on that second contract and got into the playoffs barely one season. But like he's never been number 6 overall pick in the draft kind of good. But like he's going to have a long career as one of these like borderline starters, bring him in to compete or as your top backup choice who's probably going to start some real games for the Colts this season. And you think he can still become something? Or you think about the Sam Darnolds and Geno Smiths of the world that start out not meeting expectations. Sam Darnold's a number 3 overall pick. Obviously, a big bust for the New York Jets. But, 3 years as a starter, had some flashes in there, has an arm, and comes back eventually and obviously has this really good year with the Minnesota Vikings and shows you that, like, hey, there's still real talent in these players. And, like, to me, Daniel Jones, Justin Fields, Geno Smith, like, these players are all better than Zach Wilson. Like, they're draft busts, but it's not Ryan Leaf, right? It's not Trey Lance. I mean, not that we can totally give up on Trey Lance just yet, but I mean, let's be honest. We don't think Trey Lance is probably not going to be able to figure it out. But you get the idea, right? Like, there's a difference between really nothing to work with here and, oh yeah, he's not as good as he was supposed to be for his draft slot, but he can still have a long, fine NFL career. And I think Caleb Williams' floor has already been proven to be above what other worse draft bust situations can be. And I don't want to say there's reassurance in that for Chicago Bears fans, because of course, like if Caleb Williams is any of these kind of quarterbacks that you're talking about, you're in for it's going to be devastating to the franchise because you used the number 1 overall pick, just like with how Daniel Jones and Sam Darnold were devastating for their respective teams and how lost their jobs and all the stuff that they were relying on those quarterbacks to do. But I do think it does matter to like differentiate and not just say, well, all busts are created equal here, because no, this player still has some real talent in there. And the fact that guys like Sam Darnold and Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, et cetera, have gone on to be more successful later in their careers with other teams tells you like, hey, there's different levels of talent here that you can still count on and rely on here. So we can feel like, hey, Caleb Williams has got it. He's got something. He's got enough certain amount of something to be starting NFL quarterback. That's the floor to me. Then you go over to the ceiling conversation we just had. Is it Kyler Murray? Is it Jordan Love? Is it Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes? I mean, that now we've kind of narrowed our range here from 0 to 100 to more like, I don't know how to put a numerical value on Kyler Murray versus like Daniel Jones, but like we go from 0 to 100 to, I don't know, 40 to 75 percentiles here. Like that was the point of the exercise of like the floor, the ceiling exercise is to like make it wider bounds than just biggest bust of all time to future Hall of Fame quarterback. Like narrow that down to like more of an appropriate range for where this quarterback is. But then we can take it a step further and compare his range to some of the other young quarterbacks in his draft class to get a sense of like where they're going along their careers, despite having supposedly better seasons than Caleb Williams right away as a rookie. So we'll compare Caleb Williams' floor and ceiling to some of the other quarterbacks in his own draft class next on Locked On Bears. So we kind of set our own floor and ceiling here for Caleb Williams that I think is a little bit narrower of a range, a little bit more appropriate for what we've seen from him so far. But I want to compare what we've got to some of the other areas for other young quarterbacks. Again, full credit to PFF's John Costco for his article looking at the floor and ceilings of all of these young quarterbacks across the way. And I think it's an interesting exercise to kind of take it's an interesting measuring point to take stock of like how these guys are doing. Because obviously, like we can all say Jaden Daniels had a better rookie season than Caleb Williams, right? A little more debatable for the likes of Drake May and certainly like Michael Penix. Bo Nix probably had a better season than Caleb Williams, although very, very different situations what they were asked to do. So it's like kind of hard, but like that's the whole point of the comparison here. Like that's why I want to do this, because it's not an easy, clean, like all these players were better or all these players were worse, right? It's there's so much nuance and like context to like, well, yeah, if you put Caleb in Denver where Bo Nix was, he may have had a better season than what Bo Nix did, but that's not what happened. And if you put Bo Nix in Chicago with what Caleb had, he probably didn't have as good of a season as Caleb would have. So how do you parse that out? Or same with the Falcons and Michael Penix and even Jaden Daniels in Washington, right? Like each guy's own set of situations is kind of their own beast and their own burden to carry here. But like for comparison, the ceiling and floor that John Costco has for Jaden Daniels is a ceiling of Lamar Jackson and a floor of Kyler Murray, which is interesting with floor of Kyler Murray being kind of where we were leaving Caleb Williams. And that to me feels like also an underrating of Kyler Murray. Like, because if you're saying Jaden Daniels' floor is Kyler Murray, then you're thinking like the worst Jaden Daniels can be at this point is Kyler Murray after one season. Like, I don't think that's a low enough floor for what. Yes, Jaden Daniels had a phenomenal rookie season. There's nothing to take nothing away from that. But we've seen players have really great first seasons or early seasons of their career and then not pan out. And like this is not a one-to-one comparison for the player, but like I think about RG3 in Washington, offensive rookie of the year as a, Pro Bowl player in year one. Very different style of season, but point being like comes out of the gate like gangbusters and then doesn't hold up over the course of their career. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen to Jaden Daniels, but the point being like Jaden Daniels having one great season does not guarantee he's got a floor of a Pro Bowl quarterback just yet. Like that's not to say he's going to like get worse, but that's assuming a lot of like continuing to get better every year. And that's sort of defeats the purpose of the floor and the ceiling there. Whereas like someone like Drake May, I think is in a more interesting comparison here where he lists a floor and a ceiling for Drake May, a ceiling of Trevor Lawrence and a floor of Daniel Jones, which is another quarterback we had talked about there with Daniel Jones. But even then, like the ceiling of Trevor Lawrence feels really low there for Drake May. I mean, it was one season in a tough spot in New England with kind of a lame duck coaching staff and in the middle of a teardown. They didn't really have much for weapons for Drake May. Like it was a really tough spot for him. So it's hard to feel like his ceiling is a quarterback like Trevor Lawrence, who's good, but we're not sure how good Trevor Lawrence is. I don't think we even know what Trevor Lawrence's floor and ceiling are going to be. So like that feels a little bit like high for Jaden Daniels and kind of low for Drake May. Michael Penix, I think, has a good range here with a ceiling of Justin Herbert and a floor of Jameis Winston. Like that's really all over the place. And that I like. Like that's a really good mixture there of like, yeah, even Jameis Winston is not a terrible NFL quarterback. He's had a long career and has been an on and off starter his whole time. It's just there's a lot of boom or bust there and a lot of turnovers, big plays and big mistakes there. Whereas like Justin Herbert has a lot fewer of the mistakes, but has all if not more of the big plays there. And that's a nice, easy visual comparison of like, okay, yeah, Justin Herbert on the high end, Jameis Winston on the low end. But you can kind of compare Caleb in there where it's like Jaden Daniels is supposed to be one of these super high-end quarterbacks, and maybe there's a good chance he gets there. And Drake May is supposed to be a little bit on the lower end of quarterbacks, and maybe there's a good chance he ends up somewhere more in there. Whereas Michael Penix could kind of be all over the place from really, really high to really, really low. I don't even know how you set a floor or a ceiling for J.J. McCarthy, given that he hasn't done anything yet. He was just hurt his whole rookie season. But a floor of Sam Darnold and a ceiling of Joe Burrow is a similar type of range that I feel like Caleb Williams still belongs in here, right? Like these are the same caliber of quarterbacks we were talking about for Caleb Williams, where it's like maybe even Joe Burrow's a bit of a high one for J.J. McCarthy's ceiling to be Joe Burrow feels maybe a little rich for me, but like a floor of Sam Darnold is a lot more of a nice range there. And maybe Burrow is just like the easiest stylistic comp there for somebody like McCarthy, but like Joe Burrow, I mean, I don't know, is Joe Burrow a future Hall of Fame quarterback? I guess it's still a little bit to be determined there what he does with the rest of his career, but like those players to me make for really good quarterback ranges to sort of visualize like, okay, McCarthy's somewhere between Burrow and Darnold, Penix is somewhere between Herbert and Winston, and then I think if you start to put Caleb Williams back in there like somewhere between Daniel Jones on the low end, and then like Kyler Murray, Aaron Rodgers. Like I want something between Murray and Aaron Rodgers if we can, but I just don't know. There's not quite that perfect stylistic quarterback there for Caleb, but like that's kind of where you're seeing like Jaden Daniels' range narrowing higher to the top. You see Drake May's range kind of narrowing a little bit on the lower side, and then Penix can still kind of be all over the place. McCarthy can still kind of be all over the place. Even Bo Nix, like a ceiling of Drew Brees and a floor of Mac Jones. I don't know if Bo Nix is ever going to be Drew Brees, but I think he should be better than Mac Jones, right? Like, so those guys, I think, are a more close comparison for the type of range we're looking at for this quarterback. And I think we're going to learn a lot more in year two as their situations change and everyone else goes through ups and downs, right? When Caleb Williams has so much adversity around him, he's not going to have that much adversity around him every year for the rest of his career. His support is going to get better and his job is going to get easier. Whereas Jaden Daniels had everything going right around him. And it's not likely that everything is going to keep going right around Jaden Daniels for the rest of his career, so it's going to get more difficult for him. And I think I put Drake May in the Caleb conversation where a lot was really difficult for Drake May, so things should get easier for him. So you should, in theory, see a better quarterback in year two than in year one, right? And so you can start to sort of chart these quarterbacks' paths as things balance out, where like every quarterback is going to go through easy good seasons and tough bad seasons, and over the course of your career, you start to equal out as everyone goes through them at different times, but it kind of averages out to similar opportunities to succeed and show us what they truly are capable of as quarterbacks. And then we'll get a much more, I don't want to even say apples to apples, but right, a much more comparable set of resumes and experiences and criteria to say, okay, how do these quarterbacks actually line up? Because you have fewer and fewer hypotheticals of, well, if this had gone different or if that had gone different or if he was on that team or if he had that, like as you go through their career, you kind of get a better sense of like, no, quarterbacks after 3 or 4 years, you know what they are kind of regardless of situation, and we'll know for sure then just how close all of these guys line up and compare. I mean, especially for J.J. McCarthy, who we just haven't even seen right now. So I certainly think drawing any kind of conclusions about this quarterback class in particular is foolish, and writing off a lot based on just the first season and projecting, well, that's what Jaden Daniels is going to be forever, and that's what Drake May is going to be forever, and that's what Bo Nix is going to be forever, and that's what Caleb Williams is going to be forever. Like, on the ups and downs there is too hasty and too foolish. So I hope that rather than just kind of saying, hey, here's what they did in year one, and let's stretch that out to the rest of their careers, instead saying like, hey, here's how the floor and ceiling seem to have shifted a little bit after one season, as it narrows a little bit, so we kind of see, okay, well, he's definitely not going to be that bad, but he's definitely not going to be that great. Like, you can kind of get a sense of where these quarterbacks all lie, and that's what I think the real value is in this article for PFF and kind of talking through that in the Caleb Williams context on today's podcast. I hope that helped sort of compare this quarterback class for you as we kind of keep tabs on how these players develop through the rest of their NFL careers. And we'll be keeping close tabs on Caleb Williams and everything else happening with the Chicago Bears all offseason long right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're not quite every day at this stage of the offseason, but in the ramp up to training camp, as we get into July and closer to the end of July when training camp starts, we'll be back to a full 5 days a week. So that's why you got to be subscribed to make sure you're not missing any of our Bears analysis, making us your first listen each and every day. And that way you make sure you don't miss another opportunity to bear down.